On the morning of her father's funeral, a young woman found a yellowed envelope taped to the back of his bathroom mirror, and inside it, a brass key and a hand-drawn map to 300 acres of land no one in the family had ever spoken of. What she found at the end of that map wasn't just an inheritance, it was the slow, careful proof that some fathers spend a lifetime hiding the truth in plain sight, waiting for the only person they trust to come looking. If you've ever felt like there was a door in your own family that nobody would open, like the most important thing about the people who raised you was the thing they never said out loud, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The morning of my father's funeral, I came home from the cemetery alone, and I sat at the kitchen table in the black dress I had not owned a week before, and I tried to remember how to be in a house without him in it. I was 18 years old. My name is Sarah Vance. My mother had passed when I was 9, and for the 9 years since, my father David and I had lived in the small white house at the end of Hollow Lane, the way two people who have already lost the third one live, quietly, carefully, with too much room at the table. The cancer had moved fast. 3 months from the morning he had set down his coffee cup and said, "Sarah, I need to tell you something," to the afternoon I had held his hand in a hospice bed and watched him stop breathing. There had been a long list of things he had wanted to tell me. He had only gotten through some of them. The rest he had run out of time for, and the running out had been visible on his face at the end, a kind of frustration so quiet I had mistaken it for pain. The reading of the will, which had taken place the day before the funeral in the office of an old country lawyer named Mr. Alistair Finch, had been very short. The house, the truck, his small savings account, his life insurance, everything came to me. There was nothing unexpected in it. There was also, I would learn the next day, nothing in it about 300 acres of land. The morning after the funeral, I made myself get up. I made myself eat half a slice of toast. I made myself go upstairs to my father's bathroom to clean out the medicine cabinet, because the hospice nurse had told me that this was a thing I should do soon, while my hands still needed something to do. The bathroom smelled of old soap and of him, of the cedar aftershave he had used for as long as I had been alive, and I had to sit down on the edge of the tub for a minute before I could open the cabinet door. I took out his razor. I took out a half-empty bottle of aspirin. I took out a comb. And then I noticed, because I had cleaned the mirror 1,000 times in 18 years and had never noticed before, that the mirror itself was sitting slightly proud of the wall on the left side, as if something had been wedged behind it. I lifted the mirror off its hook. It came down heavier than I expected, and taped to the back of it, in the dead center, was a manila envelope the color of weak tea. The envelope was sealed with a strip of yellowed tape that had gone brittle. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting, not the rushed handwriting of the last 3 months, the careful, deliberate hand of a man with time. The envelope had been there for a long time. I sat down on the cold tile floor with the envelope on my knees, and I did not open it for a long minute, because I knew, in the way you know certain things in the body before the mind has named them, that whatever was inside this envelope was going to ask something of me. I slid my thumb under the flap. Inside were 3 things: a small brass key on a leather thong, worn smooth by what had clearly been years of handling, a piece of brown paper folded into quarters, which proved to be a hand-drawn map of a section of country I had never seen before, marked with a single X and the words, "The North Gate," in my father's careful capitals, and a single sheet of yellowed notepaper on which my father had written, in the same careful hand, a short note. "Sarah, if you are reading this, I did not get the chance to tell you about this place myself. Take the map to Mr. Finch. He has been holding the deed for me for 12 years. Do not speak of this to anyone else in the family until you have walked the land yourself. The foundation is the key. Dad." I read the note 3 times. The third time I read it, my hands had stopped shaking enough that I could fold it carefully and slide it back into the envelope. I put the envelope into the inside pocket of my coat. I went downstairs. I called Mr. Finch's office from the kitchen phone, and his secretary said he could see me at 2 o'clock. I drove the truck into town with the envelope against my ribs and the gray rain on the windshield going the slow speed of grief. And I had no idea the brass key in my pocket was about to change everything. Mr. Finch kept his office above a feed store on the main street of a town called Holloway. The stairs creaked. The door had a frosted pane with his name painted in gold letters that had started to flake at the corners. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of old paper and furniture polish, and Mr. Finch himself looked like he had been part of the room for 50 years. Thin white hair combed sideways, a neatly trimmed white beard, wire-rimmed spectacles he peered at me over the top of, the way an old man looks at a young woman he has been waiting to meet for a long time. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was the sound of gravel stirred slowly with a spoon. "Sit down, child. I was hoping you would walk through that door before the week was out." He did not offer condolences. He had said his at the funeral. He opened a thick paper folder on the desk between us, and he started to read. My father, David Vance, had been in possession for the last 12 years of the deed to 340 acres of mixed pasture, hardwood forest, and creek frontage along the upper reaches of a waterway called the Cooper Branch, in a county I had been through perhaps 4 times in my life. The parcel had a single outstanding fee on it, a $1 nominal lien for back assessment, owed since the day of recording. If I paid it that afternoon, the land would pass to me, free and clear. Mr. Finch peered at me over his spectacles. "There is, however, an offer on the table, Sarah. I would not be doing my duty to your father if I did not tell you about it." A development company out of the city, Oak Ridge Development, had been making inquiries on the parcel for almost 2 years. They were prepared to write a check that day for $25,000, sight unseen. Mr. Finch could have the funds in my hand by the end of the week. $25,000. I sat with that number for a moment. My father had left me a small savings account and a paid-off house and a truck with 80,000 miles on it, and I was 18 years old with no clear plan for what came next. $25,000 would have covered a year of community college and a winter coat that did not have a tear in the lining and the property taxes on the house at the end of Hollow Lane for the next 5 years. I thought about all of those things, and then I thought about my father, 3 days before he died, gripping my hand in the hospice bed and saying, with his eyes very clear for the first time in a week, "Sarah, listen to me. I have set it up. You are going to be all right. There is something I need to tell you about." And then the morphine had come up, and he had drifted, and I had thought it had been the cancer talking. "I am not selling, Mr. Finch," I heard myself say. "It is mine. I want to see it." Mr. Finch nodded once, slowly, the way a man nods when something he has been quietly hoping for has just come to pass. "Your father said you would say that," he said. "He told me, the last time I saw him, that he had raised a stubborn daughter, and he was grateful for it. Sarah, before you go out there is one thing I have to tell you. Your Uncle Raymond, your father's older brother, has been making inquiries with my office for the better part of a month. He believes the parcel was promised to him. Your father was very clear, on the record, that it was not. I expect Raymond will come to see you. I expect he will not be gentle." I had met my Uncle Raymond perhaps 6 times in my life. He had been at the funeral, standing in the back of the chapel in a suit that did not quite fit, and he had shaken my hand at the graveside with a grip that had been a fraction too tight. He had told me, in a voice meant to sound concerned, that I should call him if I needed anything at all. He had not been close to my father in 20 years. I knew, in the way a child knows certain things about adults without ever being told, that there was a long, quiet reason for that distance, and I knew that the reason had something to do with my grandfather's farm, which had been sold the year my father turned 30, and which my father had never spoken about even when I had asked. I thanked Mr. Finch. I paid the $1 fee. I signed the deed. I went home and I packed a duffel bag with 3 days of clothes and a thermos of coffee and a flashlight, and the next morning at first light, I drove the truck west across 2 counties to find the X on my father's map. The road turned to gravel an hour outside Holloway. The gravel turned to dirt 20 minutes after that. The hills steepened. The fields fell away. Snow clung to the shadows beneath the pines, and the air through the cracked window of the truck smelled of wood smoke and damp earth instead of asphalt. I stopped at the only store I saw, a hardware store at a crossroads called Cooper Mills, to ask directions. A man named George ran the place. He was 70 if he was a day, with a face like cured leather and hands the size of catcher's mitts. He took one look at me standing in his doorway with my father's map in my hand, and the color went out of his face for a half a second. "Lord have mercy," he said quietly. "You're David Vance's girl." I said I was. He came out from behind the counter and shook my hand with both of his. "Last time I saw your daddy, he stood right where you're standing now and bought a brass padlock and a roll of sealing wax. That was, 11 years ago, I expect. He told me he was sealing up a thing that was going to need to stay sealed for a while. He didn't tell me what. I am sorry for your loss, Sarah. He was a fine man." He went quiet. He looked me up and down in my father's old coat and my wet boots. "Child, you look like you have been carrying the world for a week. There's coffee in the back. On the house, on me, no arguments." I drank a cup standing up. He drew me a fresh map on the back of a receipt and waved me out the door, and as I crossed the parking lot he called after me, "Your daddy was the best landman this county ever had, Sarah Vance. You remember that here?" The drive up the dirt road was 4 miles. I came around the last bend and the truck slowed of its own accord. 340 acres opened out in front of me, and my heart did exactly what hearts do in that moment. Only this time, it did not sink. It rose. Rolling pasture went down to a tree line of old hardwoods, and the hardwoods went down to a creek I could hear from inside the truck cab. There were no buildings visible from the gate. The X on my father's map was marked at the northern edge of the parcel, half a mile up a rutted track that ran along the eastern fence line, in a place the map labeled the North Gate. I parked the truck at the bottom of the track. I walked the half-mile up with my father's map in one hand and the brass key in the other, and the cold air bit at my cheeks the way only good cold air does, the kind that has come down from somewhere clean. At the top of the track, against the back fence of the property, hidden inside a deep stand of cedars I would have walked past in summer without ever seeing, stood a small stone building the size of a one-car garage. The walls were low fieldstone, mortared by a careful hand. The roof was tin gone the color of dark pewter. The door was a heavy slab of oak with iron hinges and a single brass lock, gleaming faintly under 30 years of weather, the way a brass lock gleams when somebody has been keeping it oiled. The brass key in my pocket turned in that lock as if it had been turned the week before. I had to lean against the door to push it open because the wood had swollen against the frame over the long winter, and then the hinges groaned like an old man waking up, and a wave of cold, dry air rolled out over me. It smelled of old paper and damp earth and the faintest underlying ghost of cedar aftershave, the way the air in a room smells when somebody who loved it has not been gone as long as you thought. Inside, shafts of dusty sunlight cut down through 3 high, narrow windows I had not seen from outside. The floor was swept clean. Along one wall ran a long oak workbench, and on the workbench, in a neat row, sat 3 wooden crates with iron banding at the corners, the letters D.V. burned into each lid. Along the opposite wall stood 2 tall oak filing cabinets, the kind that used to live in the back rooms of lawyers' offices. Beside the cabinets, on a small folding table, sat a battery-powered cassette player, and taped to the top of the player, a single index card in my father's handwriting. "Sarah, press play first, then open the first crate, then the second, then the third, then the cabinets, in this order. Dad." I sat down on the cold stone floor. My legs had gone weak in a way I had not felt since the hospice nurse had come to tell me that he was gone. I slid the cassette out of its case. I put it into the player. I pressed play. There was a hiss of old magnetic tape, and then my father's voice. Not the thin, tired voice of the last 3 months. The full voice of a man with time, the way he had sounded the year I was 14, and we had driven to the coast together. "Sarah," he said, "if you are listening to this, then I am gone before I got to tell you about this place in person, and I am sorry for that. I have made this tape every year for the last 11 years, on your birthday, and I have replaced the old one each time, because there were things I wanted to say to you that I could only say if I knew you were old enough to hear them. The version you are listening to was recorded on your 18th birthday 6 weeks ago. It is the one I always meant for you to hear. He told me everything. He told me my grandfather had owned, at the end of his life, 600 acres on the western side of the county, which had been the Vance family land for 4 generations. He told me my grandfather had died without a clear will, and that my Uncle Raymond, the older brother, had moved fast in the weeks afterward to have the entire parcel sold to a development company at a price that, in retrospect, had been less than half what the land had been worth. My father had not been told about the sale until after it had closed. He had been 29 years old, working out of state. By the time he had gotten home, the deed had been signed. The family had been split clean down the middle, and the split had never healed. My father had not fought Raymond in court because the fight would have taken every dollar he had and would have left the family fractured for another generation. He had done something quieter. Over the next 30 years, he had bought back, parcel by parcel, the most valuable piece of what had been the original Vance land, the 340 acres along the Upper Cooper Branch, which contained the senior water rights to the entire valley, the only remaining stand of old-growth hardwood within 40 miles of the county seat, and, buried in the filing cabinets behind me, the original 1898 land survey that established a boundary line my grandfather had been cheated out of by the original buyer 80 years before. He had bought the land back in small pieces, under a holding name, through Mr. Finch. He had paid every property tax in cash. He had never told Raymond. He had never told me, because he had not wanted to put the burden of the quarrel onto me until I was old enough to choose, freely, what to do with it. In the first crate is the money I could not invest in stocks or in a college fund without my brother finding out about it, my father said on the tape. It is your education fund and the savings of a careful life. 22 years of small deposits in $50 bills, sealed in canning jars under straw. In the second crate is the original 1898 survey and the deeds to every parcel of this land, in your name, recorded and held by Mr. Finch. In the third crate are the heritage seeds, your great-grandmother's tomato seeds, her bean seeds, the original orchard apple grafts, dormant in wax. Plant them in the spring if you choose. In the filing cabinets is the rest. Every letter your grandfather wrote to me before he died. The proof, if it ever comes to that the original sale of the Vance land was made under fraud. Raymond knows the proof exists. He does not know where. He has been looking for 30 years. The tape went quiet for a long moment. Then my father said, "Sarah, here is the only thing I am going to ask of you. Walk the land before you decide anything. Sleep on it. Talk to George at the crossroads. Talk to Mr. Finch. And then do whatever feels right in your own heart. Because the land was always going to be yours, and the choice was always going to be yours, and I trust you with both. The foundation is the key. Everything in this place starts with the foundation. I love you, sweetheart. I am so proud of the woman you are about to become." The tape clicked off. I sat there on the cold stone floor of a building I had not known existed an hour before, and I cried the way you cry when somebody you love has reached forward through time to put their hand on your shoulder. I cried for a long time. When I stopped, I opened the first crate. $86,000 in $50 bills, sealed in glass jars under straw. I opened the second crate. The 1898 survey, laid out flat under glass, the boundary lines drawn in iron gall ink that had not faded. I opened the third crate. 42 paper packets of seeds, each one labeled in my great-grandmother's looping handwriting, and beneath them, in small wax-sealed jars, the apple grafts. I drove back to Holloway that night. I did not tell anyone where I had been. The next morning, exactly as Mr. Finch had said he would, my Uncle Raymond came to the house at the end of Hollow Lane. He stood on the porch in his suit that did not quite fit, and he did not ask to come inside. He said he had come to talk about family business. He said he had been thinking about my father's last wishes, and that there were certain understandings that had existed between my father and himself, certain quiet arrangements concerning property that did not appear in any will. He said he was prepared, out of love for his late brother, to take certain obligations off my shoulders. He said the number $25,000. He said the words, "a fair price for an old piece of family land." He said the words, "You do not want to be tied up in something this complicated, Sarah, at your age." I let him finish. I stood in the doorway of my father's house in my father's old coat, and I let my uncle say everything he had come to say. While he talked, I thought about three things, in this order. I thought about the smell of cedar aftershave that had rolled out of the stone building the morning before. I thought about my father in a hospice bed 3 days before the end, gripping my hand with the last of his strength to tell me I was going to be all right. And I thought about a 1898 land survey under glass, in iron gall ink that had not faded, in a filing cabinet 4 counties west of where I was standing. When my uncle was done, I said one word. No. He blinked. He started to say something. I held up my hand the way George had held his up in the hardware store. Raymond, I said, I have been to the North Gate. I have read the survey. I have heard my father's voice on the tape he made on my 18th birthday. I know what was sold in 1971, and I know how it was sold, and I know who signed the papers. I am not selling the land. I am not selling any part of the land, and I am not going to take you to court over what happened 30 years ago, because my father did not want me to spend my life fighting his brother, and I do not want to spend mine doing it either. But I want you to listen to me very carefully. The land is mine. The proof is in a place you are not going to find. If you ever come to this house again to ask me about it, I will not be as kind as I am being right now. My uncle stood on the porch in the cold and looked at me, and something in his face went through 3 different expressions, none of which I will ever forget, and then he turned and walked down the steps to his car without saying anything else. I called Mr. Finch the next morning. I told him I wanted to put the entire 340 acres into a conservation easement, with the development rights extinguished in perpetuity. I told him I wanted a small portion, perhaps 5 acres around the stone building, kept out of the easement so that I could build a house there in a few years. I told him I wanted the heritage seeds cataloged and shared with the State Agricultural Extension Office with the Vance name on the donation. I told him I wanted a small scholarship established at the county high school, funded out of the cash in the first crate, for any student who wanted to study land management or sustainable farming. He listened to all of it. When I was finished, he said, "Your father told me you would do something like this, Sarah. He said it the last time I saw him. He was right." Oak Ridge Development raised their offer to $250,000 the following week. I told Mr. Finch to write them a letter, explaining that the land was no longer for sale, and that it would not be for sale in this lifetime, and that any further inquiries should be directed to the Conservation Trust. The letter went out on a Tuesday in the 2nd week of April. They did not write back. I stand on the porch of the small stone building now sometimes, in the slow blue hour just before sundown, when the cedars along the eastern fence line have gone dark against the last of the light. Tell me, in the comments, about a quiet thing somebody who loved you left behind for you to find. I read every single one. Thank you for listening.